Sometimes horror filmmakers need to employ some trade secrets in order to creep out their audiences. It's true that there's 1,000,001 sneaky tricks used to spook film fans, and their genius has evolved as much as cinema itself has over the years. With this cinematic sleight of hand in mind, this list is here to bring you the little-known filmmaking secrets which you never before realised shaped the genre's greatest hits. From the infamous films of Wes Craven through to more recent J-horror remakes, the one thing all horrors have in common is bizarre behind-the-scenes secrets that you never would have guessed. I am the classified Ash from What Culture Horror, and these are 9 horror movie secrets you didn't know. 9. The Ring. Casting Cash Shadows. There's a lot to be afraid of in The Ring, not least the slew of lesser rip-offs and embarrassing sequels that this terrifying remake spawned. Adapted from Hideo Nakata's 1998 original, this movie sparked the Hollywood obsession with J-horror remakes for good reason, as it managed to make the Japanese original even scarier in translation. One spooky detail of the movie that few viewers noticed the first time around though, is the fact that no one in the Ring's cast has a shadow. In the movie that is. Pretty sure the actors all cast shadows in reality, or at least I hope so. Throughout the film, the cast are carefully lit so as to cast no shadows in most shots, an unusual piece of meticulous cinematography which was a conscious decision on the part of the film's creative team. The filmmakers explain that this tiny, almost impossible to pinpoint detail adds a deeply creepy air of surreal wrongness to the flick's look, one which makes the entire story feel weightless and dreamlike. 8. Friday the 13th. Driving Mrs. Voorhees. Anyone who loves horror cinema, or is just interested in surviving a phone call with the Ghostface killer, can tell you that the murderer in Friday the 13th is not franchise favourite Jason Voorhees, but instead his grief-maddened mother. Ms. Voorhees is a villain whose creepiness came from Betsy Palmer subverting her long-established habit of playing bright, cheery characters. And the role was so out of sorts for her that film critic Gene Siskel went as far as to reveal Palmer's hometown when slating the movie, in a move which makes modern critics seem positively stable. So Palmer must have really believed in this role if she was willing to take it on, despite running the risk of doxing by irresponsible critics, right? Well, actually, her car just broke down. Uninterested in the slasher's story, a reluctant Palmer signed on to play the murderous mother of Jason Voorhees solely because her car needed repairs and she was hard up for cash. And so, an iconic horror villain was born out of necessity, which is appropriately enough the mother of invention. 7. The Hills Have Eyes. That spider scene. This intense survival horror pits an all-American nuclear family against an inbred family of monstrous mutants who have been deformed and maddened by exposure to nuclear fallout. It is a big old satire of Americana which features some intense and horrifying sequences, and it's all the more effective for its slow build-up. For example, the infamous scene wherein the family encounter a tarantula inside their trailer and struggle to fight it off perfectly foreshadows their regression to the state of nature when battling the mountain men. So it must have been planned, storyboarded, and scripted to tie into the film's themes, right? Actually, the tarantula sequence was entirely unplanned. The scene was hastily filmed and thrown in during the filmmaking process solely because the filmmakers found the spider on location during filming, picked the giant arachnid off the road, and decided they would stick it in the movie. And yes, it was safely handled and returned home, animal lovers. 6. Night of the Living Dead. Real fleshy snacks. Zombie movie legend George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead is one of horror cinema's most influential films, as well as the beginning of a string of socially charged horror installments from the Creepshow director. A black and white nightmare, the movie was an outsized success upon release, with its bleak horror resonating with audiences and creating the blueprint for zombie films as a subgenre. As for the flesh that said zombies are chomping down on in this movie though, it's actually roast ham covered in chocolate sauce, a grotesque combination which shows up well in black and white and provides a perfect contrast to match the tones of flesh and blood. The combination was rumoured to be so stomach-churning that the pallid, pale faces of the undead were often due to the sickly feeling they gained from eating, well, roast ham covered in chocolate sauce. 5. Halloween. The Origins of Michael Myers. For such a masterpiece, it is a minor miracle that John Carpenter's iconic slasher Halloween wasn't a hack job. Sorry. The film's concept first came from a proposed sequel to Black Christmas, according to its director, and the role of the film's mute antagonist was filled in by the screenwriter Nick Castle simply because someone needed to lumber around menacingly in the iconic blue boiler suit. As for the Michael Myers mask, Well, that detail is one recalled by horror fans even decades later. So surely a film which would go on to spawn an entire subgenre, as well as countless sequels, remakes and reboots, could put in a little extra effort and design something original. Sure, or an unconcerned carpenter could just tell a costume designer to just find a mask with human features, resulting in an iconic horror movie costume which is actually just an inside-out Captain Kirk mask that has been painted white before shooting. 4. Hostel. Eli Roths' disturbing discovery. One of the more effective movies to come from the mid-2000s torture porn horror trend, Eli Roths' Hostel was a surprise hit upon release in 2005. It follows the misadventures of ignorant American backpackers who are kidnapped and sold into a torture ring. But where did that idea come from? Well, take this one with a pinch of salt, as he is something of a showman, but according to Roth, the conceit was based on a real-life website he came across. The film's premise is supposedly taken from a real site which offered visitors the opportunity to murder a willing participant for $10,000, a concept Roth was morbidly fascinated by. The director didn't take his research too far though, and I quote, "So to find out more you had to give your credit card details." And I'm like, well, if this is fake, they'll have my credit card. But if this is real and they're really killing people, they'll have my credit card. You know, I'm not that curious. 3. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Real blood. By all accounts, the experience of shooting 1974's unforgettably intense horror flick, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, was a grueling, grimy affair. Despite the best attempts of a game cast who made a point of keeping spirits up, it was constantly plagued by problems ranging from piles of genuine rotting meat stinking up the set in summer heat, to constant risks of heat stroke, to even Leatherface actor Gunnar Hansen accidentally ingesting laced brownies and becoming disastrously high just before a chase scene. Impressively enough, however, the film's director and horror legend Tobe Hooper claims the production used almost no fake blood, as it was both expensive and, being made mostly from syrup, was difficult to use and store in the intense heat. As a result, some pivotal scenes needed to improvise. That gruesome moment where heroine Marilyn Burns has her fingertips sliced open in order to feed the family's ailing grandfather. After a few attempts to rely on a malfunctioning prosthetic, a frustrated Burns opted to have her actual finger cut with a razor blade, and that is genuine blood featured on screen during the dinner scene. 2. The Craft. Wiccan Ways. The Craft is an iconic slice of cheesy 90s teen horror, which deserves to be mentioned alongside the more celebrated likes of I Know What You Did Last Summer and Scream. Unlike those efforts though, The Craft is no slasher, instead focusing on a set of teenage witches whose dabbling in dark arts gets the better of them. A fusion of Heathers and Carrie, the movie is a classic, largely aided by the fact that the filmmakers took a surprising amount of care when putting this one together. Well, surprising if compared to John Carpenter's winging it attitude, perhaps. The filmmakers hired Pat Devin, a practicing Wiccan, to ensure accuracy in the film's depictions of witchcraft, and the real-life witch was happy to report that few artistic liberties were taken and her suggestions were always graciously received. Devin also wrote the incantations featured in the film to further safeguard the film's accuracy and attention to detail. So, you're dealing with the real deal here, folks. 1. Scream. The film's original title and star. Wes Craven's Scream series is one of the slasher genre's finest releases, a witty deconstruction of the subgenre, which also manages to be a brutally effective example of it at the same time, not to mention a twisty whodunit mystery to boot. However, it went through a few changes between script and screen. Written by Kevin Williamson over the course of a few days, the original screenplay was titled Scary Movie, with the name Scream being suggested by the film's producers. The movie was also originally intended to star the then uber-famous Drew Barrymore as the resourceful Sidney Prescott, only for the actor to read the script and report back to the filmmakers that she would love the part of the opening sequence's first victim, tragic teen Casey Becker. And the rest is history.